In other ideas of Christian theology, the seraphim can be seen as the caretakers of God's throne, and much like Isaiah's account, they too continuously sing the words, Holy, Holy, Holy. There are also ideas that the seraphim assisted God in maintaining order in the world, though the specifics of this are often vague. Other ideas focus on the heat or the fire that the seraphim have been associated with, and that the fire is a symbolic notion of themselves and their relationship with God. The fire's movement is constant and gradually rises upward, much as the seraphim do, as they fly above God, and the constant crackling of the fire could be linked with the constant praising of his name. The other idea that paints the seraphim as fire is that the fire consumes that which it touches, and thus destroys, or in the case of the seraphim, destroys the sin of a person, much like that which is done to Isaiah. Some might say that the fires cleanse.
Hey, what's up?
And this, the seraphim are indeed quite similar. There's also the idea that we've already discussed, that fire emits light, and the seraphim share that same property, though a far more divine and intense light that can be comparable to the sun itself.
I'm bored, so let me just go live on YouTube.
That can be comparable to the sun itself.
That's all you gonna say?
In Judaism, Isaiah's vision is recognized in various Jewish services, and the seraphim are acknowledged. In the Kabbalah, for example, the seraphim are seen to drift from God, only to burn up and return to his side. Whilst in other beliefs, the seraphim become equivocal to that of the cherubim.
It's cold.
Seen in Ezekiel's vision. But
It gets very cold in the wintertime.
The seraphim
That's why
and
you gotta keep the
angels
house
in
warm.
general are seen as more symbolic than anything else. In Islam, meanwhile, a hadith by Persian scholar Al-Tamidi speaks of a conversation between the Prophet Muhammad and Allah, where they speak of the exalted assembly, those being the angels amongst Iblis, who disputed the creation.
I made breakfast earlier. I made like sausage, egg, onion sandwich. I already ate that
It
earlier.
is believed that the seraphim are included within this category, or that Iblis had been one of the seraphim himself. Or perhaps
What do you plan on cooking this morning, sir?
For he was created from fire,
Ugh.
fire being a key trait for these angelic beings. Though this belief is not universal, nor is it specified.
I be into ancient history, so that's one of my favorite
In fact,
subjects.
Seraphim, at least in the way
So if you think this is boring, that's okay.
have much presence.
I'm kind of like a conspiracy theorist,
Another
so
interesting idea regarding the seraphim is in a more malevolent light, where they adopt the form of serpents. In Numbers 21:6, for example, God sends venomous serpents amongst the Israelites after their rebellion in the wilderness. But in some translations and ideas, the serpents are replaced with that of the seraphim. This is also in Deuteronomy 8:15, where the wilderness is described as being a thirsty and waterless land, with venomous.
the wilderness got water in it too.
In the original Hebraic, the term seraph can be found instead of snakes, suggesting that God might have sent the seraphim as a means to punish those who had rebelled. Some have interpreted the meaning of this translation as a particular type of snake, this seraph snake, and that they might be referring it not to an angel, but instead a reptile of some kind. There's also the idea that the snakes were
Did you enjoy?
and so their bite could be linked.
Is that a
to
disco
burning
ball?
sensation
Yeah, this
or
one.
fear.
Yeah, one of the filters. I like it though.
Fiery seraph.
I wish it was actually one on my ceiling for
The
real.
idea
That'd be
that
tight.
Snakes in the wilderness are described
Disco
as
fever.
fire, something they certainly would have in common with the seraph. Other ideas propose that the seraphim were the angels who supported Lucifer in his rebellion, or that Lucifer himself was a seraph, which some believe facilitated his transformation into a serpent in the Garden of Eden. The Ophanim. One of the most strangest and downright weirdest creatures that are thought to exist within Scripture are the Ophanim, those that are believed by some to be just a mechanism of God's chariot, and by others to be angelic beings with significant powers. The reason why they are called the Ophanim is because in ancient Hebraic, The word
How's your
opening
weekend
was
going?
thought to have meant wheels.
Who's the second person in my chat? Say something. Oh yeah, if y'all want to support me, I have a PayPal, paypal.me/KadraBanks87 KAYDRA BANKS 87. If you want to support, if you want to drop $1, drop $2, $5.
The chariot of God. And the reason for all three of these ideas can likely be pinpointed in the vision seen by Ezekiel. As mentioned earlier, Ezekiel's inaugural vision consists of some pretty wild and extraordinary things. But as far as the cherubim and the opening go, Ezekiel tells us, "As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the creatures were faced. The wheels did not change direction as the creatures went."
Yeah, this is Cheetah Babe. I changed it to Sagittarius a long time ago.
The living creatures that Ezekiel sees here are indeed the cherubim, as we've previously established. But he spends an equal amount of time taking in the sights of the 4 wheels, these openings. He describes them as glistening like topaz, and that all 4 assemble to make the shape of one wheel intersecting another. He also adds that whilst they appeared independently mobile, they only moved wherever the cherubim were facing, which has since led some to believe that the cherubs controlled the opening, or was a symbol for their outranking of them. He continues to state that they do not appear to ever change their direction, and that all the rims of their being were covered with eyes.
Yep, just Cheetah Babe.
But with this passage alone, it only raises our intrigue as to what these wheels were, and what exactly they're.
I'm Sagittarius. Well, I am a Sagittarius. I just made 35
like a week ago. Picture of what these wheels
I think 2 weeks ago.
But perhaps what makes them so stark and fascinating is how elusive they are. These wheels are not something that appear frequently throughout the Bible, and the fact that God allows Ezekiel to see them only teases the idea that they do have some significance that we are not grasping. One interesting idea that further supports the notion that these wheels were the wheels of God's chariot comes from a song of praise by David in Psalm 18, where we are told, "He mounted the cherubim that flew. He soared on the wings." And this rather unique imagery, because he says that cherubim have more vehicle, or means for which to transport him across the sky, or from heaven to earth. The cherubim in this instance become the chariot, and by this, the wheels that they are seen to manipulate become the wheels of that very chariot, those being the opening. But Ezekiel does not make this connection, but is instead taken aback by what he continues to witness. He tells us, when the living creatures...
I didn't back away from it. I just wanted to take a break. I'm still pro-black.
When the living creatures rose,
I still be lurking.
The wheels also rose. Wherever the spirit would go, they would go.
I had some personal issues going on, so I had to just take off. But I still be on YouTube. But I should have kept posting, though, because if I'd have been posting, I'd have been having a shitload of people in my life with no problem.
When the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose...
But if you want to see me more often and stuff, just make sure you come through, you chat with me, you vibe with me, you share my live, and, you know, whenever you get a little money in your pocket, just drop like $1 or $2 or $5 or $10 on my PayPal, because I dropped my PayPal info right there, so write that shit down.
The cherubim went, the opening would go too.
My Facebook name is KadraBanks, KaYDRABANKS.
Suggesting that on some level,
and I have a Twitter account. It's called Miss Cheetah. Oh yeah, on Twitter you can go live streaming over there, just audio streaming though. And I have a speaker account too. So
again, upon the chariot idea, as hinted by the Song of David in Psalm 18, one might also say that the cherubim were the drivers of the chariot, and that the wheels were merely just that, wheels. With this idea, they are not angelic and they do not have sentience, but instead are more along the lines of machinery. Yet the idea that the Ophanim were indeed angels, perhaps the weirdest of angels, given their appearance, to be consistent with some communities and traditions. We can agree from Ezekiel's account that despite their association to the cherubim, there is nothing particularly angelic about the Ophanim. They do not appear to have human characteristics like all the other angels. They do not speak and bring prophecies. Reference of them is made in the second book of Enoch, where we see Enoch ascend before the throne of God. He tells us, I saw there a very great light, and fiery troops of great archangels, incorporeal forces.
I watch my message shit too now. I be into my little ancient history, is one of my favorite. When I was young, I didn't really care for history, but as I got older, started learning. I'm like, yeah, I like history. It don't matter if history on black people, white people, any race people. I just love ancient history.
And those men took me and led me after them, and said to me, have courage, Enoch, do not fear, and showed me the Lord from afar, sitting on his very high throne. Whilst again not specifically mentioned as Ophanim, Enoch does refer to them as the many-eyed ones, which correlates with Ezekiel's description. What's interesting here is that he later identifies all the present entities, including the cherubim, seraphim, and these many-eyed ones. This is a
Samsung 8 tab I just ordered.
And that these men took him and led him.
I ordered this other tablet black. It wasn't a Samsung though, but the tablet runs so slow, but this one will run slow.
Whilst hard to say, given that Enoch doesn't.
I need to start putting that. I should have put that app on here.
To be the Ophanim, it could be said in this story that the many-eyed ones did maintain some characteristics of men, and that instead of wheels, they possessed a more expected and relatable form. They also share the same compassion as the cherubim and the seraphim, and seek to comfort Enoch when he would otherwise panic.
I'm watching this video on this YouTube channel called The Legends of History. I love watching it. And I be watching mythology and stuff. This was called What Biblically Accurate Angels.
Let me tell you about this brand new street.
It's better to know the biblical truth from your own people because the real Hebrews are black. Don't get into religion. Be spiritual.
Otherwise misunderstood creatures. The second book of Enoch continues to tell us of the many-eyed ones that, and the cherubim and seraphim standing about the throne, the six-winged and many-eyed ones do not depart, standing before the Lord's face, doing his will, and cover his whole throne, singing with gentle voice before the Lord's face. Holy, 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 Lord ruler of Sabbath, heavens and earth are full of your glory. Here we get the sense that the many-eyed ones guard the throne of heaven, and along with the cherubim and the seraphim, they will remain here for eternity at the beck and call of God. It is also established that they sing with gentle voices, which yet again humanizes the many-eyed ones, and portrays them as more relatable, perhaps even as a childlike set character. With the many-eyed ones singing, it could also be associated with several Jewish prayers, known as the Kedusha, where the Ophanim are told to offer praise upon God and glorify him as the Creator. Whilst the second book of Enoch refers to them as the many-eyed ones, the first book of Enoch refers to them directly as Ophanim, and they are said here to also guard the throne of heaven, and together with the seraphim and the cherubim, they do not sleep. Enoch tells us here, and round about were the seraphim, cherubim, and Ophanim, and these are they who sleep not, and guard the throne of his glory. There appears to be some variation
You like said a disco
when it comes to both their ranking and their closeness to God. Most commonly in
Is that a real disco ball spinning in your room?
The significance and purpose of
On the camera, yeah, but I wish it. Shit, let that. I need to go find a disco ball and put that bitch right there.
The cherubim are the closest to God, and as mentioned before, they are his chariot. More significantly, they are much more prominent in the Bible and actually appear to Ezekiel, thus giving them the edge, at least in terms of recognition. The seraphim, by comparison, are also seen in a variety of ways, including as a caretaker to God's throne. And as the Bible shows us in Isaiah's vision, the seraphim can also be viewed as absolvers of guilt. To more conservative Judaism, though, the seraphim are more symbolic in nature. These inconsistencies, if you will, are the same for the Ophanim in Jewish belief, with some believing them to be the closest of all the angels to God, as told to us by medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides, or as the thrones, which is another classification of angels. Many other Jewish philosophies confirm this idea that thrones and the Ophanim are one in the same, and one of the ways that this is done is by interpretation of Daniel's vision, where Daniel tells us he sees God in his chariot. He states, "As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze." With this idea, the thrones become established as the wheels of God's vehicle, and are set in place before he takes his seat upon it. A quote from American spirituality writer Rosemary Ellen Gilly sums up the notion of the thrones and the Ophanim being the same quite concisely, where we are told, "The thrones, also known as Ophanim and Galgalim, are creatures that function as the actual chariots of God, driven by the cherubs. They are categorized by peace and submission. God rests upon them. Thrones are depicted as great wheels containing many eyes, and reside in the area of the cosmos where material form begins to take shape. They chant glorious to God and remain forever in his presence. They mete out divine justice and maintain the cosmic harmony of all universal laws." As we can see, going by this interpretation, the thrones, or the Ophanim, lose their more typical angelic appearance, and again resume the more biblically accurate depiction as a mechanism. In any case, one might say that the function of the Ophanim, whilst intriguing and novel, is not essential to believers, which is why concrete information about them is so scarce. Whether it be from the characters of the Bible themselves, or scholars who study them, the wheels are only vital in their accordance to God. They serve to remind believers that their mystique and uncanny form is just one of the many creations that God has made that man cannot understand, and in some cases, it might serve to humble believers into realizing that they do not have all the answers. It also brings God's engineerial ingenuity into the limelight, for whilst many may take for granted the way in which the world was created, elements like the Ophanim remind them of how much a mechanical mastermind a supreme being like God must be, especially given that we to this day would not be able to create something so unusual. Others might see the Ophanim as a representation of God himself, in that because they are covered with eyes, the eyes become symbolic of God being all-seeing. If the Ophanim have a multitude of eyes and spin omnidirectionally, then it would be believed that they can see everything from every angle. This would imply then that God could very well do the same, as we know he can, from very specific mentions in the Bible, that God is everywhere and God knows everything. Thrones. As previously mentioned, the thrones are a class of angels that are similar to the Ophanim, and sometimes are outrightly assumed as being the same as the Ophanim. Very little is actually known about this type of angel, and its appearance in the Bible is scarce. One of its more notable appearances is in Colossians, where we are told, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him." What the thrones actually look like is up for some speculation, with some believing them to look similar or identical to the Ophanim, or for them to appear as a combined image of the throne of God, hence their name. In some interpretations, it is believed that the thrones are also wheels within wheels, and that these wheels are also spinning and covered with eyes. In another interpretation that coincides with the idea that the Ophanim are the wheels of God's chariot, some believe that the thrones take on the form of the chariot itself. Another interesting idea proposes that the thrones show up much later in Revelations 11 as elders. John of Revelations tells us that these elders appear to be gathered around the throne of God, and all are praising him. Whilst the elders are not described, it is their proximity to God that is most interesting to us. It could be the case that these are not just older men, but instead the very thrones that are described in Colossians. Of course, this can also be dismissed, given that the only reason this is speculated is because the elder men appear to have actual thrones of their own, those that are gathered around the one throne of God. Others believe that if these are the thrones, they have likely taken the form of old men, so as to make it easier for John to digest what he is seeing. For John had by this point seen so many ghastly and bizarre things that it might have pushed him over the edge to see the thrones in their truest appearance. In his work, De Coelesti Hierarchia, Greek author and Christian theologian Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite tells us that the thrones were the third highest of the 9 classes of angels, ranking just below the seraphim and cherubim. In many classifications, these are considered to be the first sphere of angels, and these are the angels that serve God directly, and thus are closer to him than any others.
Attention parents of children diagnosed with autism or ADHD. If you use Tylenol during pregnancy and your child develops autism or ADHD, you may be eligible for compensation. Recent studies have found that exposure to Tylenol during pregnancy dramatically increases the chances of a child developing autism or ADHD. If your child is autistic or has ADHD and you've used Tylenol while pregnant, you likely qualify to sign up for a claim. If you're ready to start a claim, or if you just want to learn more, click the button below.
Closer to him than any other. Oh my God. It should be noted that many angels in the Old Testament do not even get a description, and instead are believed to have appeared simply as men. They had no halos, no wings, and no tangible physical aspect that separated them from the common man, if not for a certain demeanour. For example, the men who appeared to Abram to bear prophecy and also have their feet washed by him are not visibly angels, but Abram can tell there is something special about them. The same could be said for the angel who wrestles all night with Jacob, and whilst this character was later depicted as an angel in classical art, the Bible simply describes him as a man. These angels, you might say, were what 12th century Jewish scholar Maimonides described as the malach, the ancient Hebrew word for messenger, and whilst they had a certain distinction about them, they were not as outlandish in appearance as the cherubim, seraphim, or ophanim. You might say that they adopted a guise that was more suited to their task, choosing to appear in a more humanoid form to deliver their message, instead of scaring the living daylights out of the recipients. The malach, or the malachim, plural, were just one type of angel that appeared in Maimonides' classification of angels, a sort of angelic hierarchy, if you will. But the question still remains, that if these malak, these messengers, took the form of men instead of appearing in their natural state, what horrors were they sparing us from seeing? On the subject of angels appearing before men, there's a concept from several classifications that incorporate the second sphere of angels, these being the angels that govern over earth, and thus are not as close to God as the aforementioned angels. Of this second sphere, the angels adopt a more familiar look. Dominions. The classification of these second sphere angels do not appear in the Bible as such. However, several of the angels who do appear in the Bible have been classified into these various groups. The dominions, for example, can be angels who help keep the world in order. They act on behalf of God, often carrying out his tasks and/or directly implementing his divine plan. According to many classifications, these angels also bring about God's judgment against sinful situations within the world. And whilst humanity might not understand or agree with the work that takes place, the dominions are believed to enforce the biblical God's perspective. Of course, because the dominions operate on earth, they are believed to take the form of humans, much like the Malachim, perhaps in an effort to avoid scaring the humans they interacted with. An example of dominions at work could be when the angels are sent down to Sodom and Gomorrah to inspect the land of what the biblical God perceived as sin. These dominions took the form of men, so as to not arouse suspicion, although ironically, this is exactly what they ended up doing. The dominions are also believed to deliver the wisdom of God to humans, most notably to those in leading positions, such as world leaders. In essence, it is believed those that pray or seek the aid of God will be answered by the dominions, who may appear in physical form to guide one into taking the best course of action. To some, these angels are led by the archangel Zadkiel, an angel who some believe prevented Abraham from sacrificing his son Isaac. Dominions in this essence are believed to take on the same role, intervening, often at the last minute, to spare someone from making a terrible decision. Naturally, to those of us with a more skeptic nature, it would be natural to argue that angelic beings do not descend from the heavens to stop us from making mistakes. However, some rationalize that these dominions act from the shadows and/or are imperceptible to the human eye. In this, they can alter our fate without us really knowing it, or may put obstacles in our path so as to prevent us from making the wrong choice. Virtues. One of the more baffling entities of angels that appear in the second sphere of angels are the virtues. Unlike the dominions, the virtues aren't necessarily believed to possess a form at all, but instead appear as a flash of light, which would explain their secondary moniker as the Shining Ones. Their role within the universe is much less understood, though it is believed that they have some influence over the elements and over nature. To others, the virtues can be interpreted as a sort of divine energy, one that can both encourage and strengthen one's belief in God. In some classifications, the virtues are believed to perform miracles to the deserving, where they reward the noble, the righteous, and those who are doing their best to get back into the algorithm. Hi. Powers or authorities. The powers or authorities are angels that you might imagine ensure order within the earthly and the celestial realms. You wouldn't be wrong for considering these angels as warrior angels, those who do battle against evil spirits and demons. Whilst not specified in Revelation, where the ultimate battle between good and evil took place, it is not a stretch to assume that the angels who battled against Lucifer in his rebellion were likely the powers and authorities, those who would have been...
Hey you! Are you looking to meet new people but don't want to go out? Then you should check out Pacocha. It's an app where you can chat with people live right from your phone and build so many great connections with people all around the world. What are you waiting for? Download and make a new connection today. Pacocha.
those who would have been donned in full shining armour and wielding fantastic weapons. However, in other beliefs, it is these very angels who were swayed by Lucifer, given that he was believed to be the chief of powers. This may have led to the strength of Lucifer's army, and why the rebellion was not so easily thwarted by God in the first place. Despite maintaining a human appearance, the sight of such an angel is believed to be quite an intimidating one. These were mean-faced soldiers that probably stood a whole head height taller than the tallest man, with wings that were sharp to the touch, and with weapons too heavy for any mortal to wield. To some, these angels could be viewed as God's task force against the evil entity, those that don't necessarily have to be of the demonic persuasion. The angel of death that is sent to destroy Jerusalem may very well have likely been of the powers or the authorities, which goes to show their immense and dastardly strength, given that God only sends one of them. Yet again, though, the original authors do not give a vivid description of these angels, making their actual image all the more elusive. Principalities. Beyond the second sphere of angels, we have the third sphere, these being angels that are believed to exist on the earth, and thus are the most likely set of angels that a human might run into. Luckily for us, these angels, much like the Dominions and the Malachim, adopt the form of humans, and so out of all the angels, it's probably these ones that you'd have the most in common with. Unlike the other angels, the principalities also live on the earth, and by this you might say that these angels are more in touch with what is happening in the world, and thus more relatable. For some, these principalities, or princes, directly inspire world leaders, nations, and in some cases, churches, in an effort to keep things running smoothly. Given their status as ruling various areas of the earth, or at least imparting power to various people, these angels are believed to wear crowns and carry with them a staff or scepter. To some believers, it is the principalities who bless mankind with art, science, maths, or some wholesome intention that will benefit the world in some way. In other cases, the principalities are believed to give strength to those who will go on to do something miraculous. Ideally, as mentioned, if you are going to run into any one of these angels, the principalities might be your safest bet. Or maybe not, if you ask St. Paul. St. Paul believed that it was actually the principalities who joined Lucifer in his rebellion, as well as the powers, where he tells us in his letter to the church of Ephesus, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Here St. Paul speaks of man's struggle not being with each other, but instead with a more spiritual threat, the principalities and the powers. This leads into the idea that the principalities, along with the powers, now worked against mankind in an effort to corrupt them. With the idea that these angels join Lucifer, you may very well label them as fallen angels, those who now do the opposite of what the principalities were originally created for. Indeed, where they once doled out wisdom, inspiration, and even strength, St. Paul gives us the idea that they would now sooner give out lies, demotivate man,